Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. In this episode, we'll explore the stories that make up the winter 2024 issue of B'nai B'rith magazine with our longtime editor, Gene Meyer. But before we get into today's conversation, a quick reminder. If you enjoy this program, be sure to subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating, too. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook to stay updated with all of our latest content. Well, today we're here to talk about the winter 2024 edition of B'nai B'rith magazine, our very own Jewish general interest periodical, published continuously since 1886. And we're proud to highlight stories that inform, inspire, and connect our readers. But first, before we dive into the behind-the-scenes details of the most recent issue, I want to take a moment to congratulate the magazine team on a major achievement. The 2023 cover story, When Anti-Semitism Hits Home, How Hate Hurts Kids, by reporter Beryl Leaf Benderly, won first place from the American Jewish Press Association Rock Hour Awards for excellence in writing about young families. Congratulations to Beryl and to you, Gene, and the entire magazine editing team on this well-deserved honor. Gene Meyer is an award-winning journalist who spent more than 3 decades at the Washington Post as a reporter and editor. He has had over 50 bylines in the New York Times. He's also written for numerous other publications, including Bethesda Magazine, where he was a contributing editor, U.S. News and World Report, and The Washingtonian. He's the author of Five for Freedom, The African American Soldiers in John Brown's Army, and more recently, Hidden Maryland, In Search of America in Miniature. Since 2009, Gene has been the editor of B'nai B'rith magazine, which has won many awards under his leadership, including the First Place Award for General Excellence Best Magazine in 2023, which we just spoke about. Every year, Gene joins us to break down stories featured in the magazine's recently released issue. Gene, welcome back to the podcast. So glad to have you with us.
I'm so glad to be here, and always happy to discuss my favorite eclectic Jewish magazine.
Well, before we jump into specific pieces in this issue, I want to ask you about the magazine itself and how you see your role. B'nai B'rith magazine has been published continuously since 1886. How do you balance preserving its legacy with keeping it fresh and relevant for today's readers?
Well, it's a challenge because one of the challenges is we come out once a year, so we don't do breaking news. We have to do stories that will stand the test of time, at least for the year. And some of them, unfortunately, hold up better than we would hope. For example, Beryl's story on rising anti-Semitism, How Hate Hurts Kids, was conceived and written before October 7th. But since then, the situation continues alarmingly so and increasingly. But we try to have a good mix of stories that, as you said, that entertain, inform, and mix up history with currency. But as I said, not breaking news especially, but stories that are still current. And it's been a great privilege and an honor. And I love our magazine. I think the readers like it, and apparently the folks who write for us also like it because they keep pitching stories to me.
Well, we all take such great pride in the magazine. Continuing a publication with such a storied history is no small feat. And it's clear the magazine continues to evolve while staying rooted in tradition. Although I must tell you, some of these bound volumes of issues that go way back, decades back, I find to be really quite fascinating. And the connection to the present is also very clear that this is a Jewish general interest magazine. Lots of interesting articles about a lot of different things that affect our community. So we're in that tradition, and we thank you for guiding us as we look forward. Well, let's dive in then into the winter 2024 issue. This edition's cover story is Bagels and Balalaikas, A Return to Brighton Beach. It features a series of photographs of the Brooklyn neighborhood, Brighton Beach. Lifelong Brooklynite Marcia Bricker Halpern revisited locations that she photographed in 1979, capturing the same spots on the boardwalk and Brighton Beach Avenue. How do the locations differ from her present-day photos of the same areas, or have they remained largely the same? I mean, much of Brooklyn has changed, but a lot of it hasn't. So how would you assess the before and not the after, but the before and now?
Well, first a word about the photographer. This is a photo essay with extended captions, and Marcia has a personal connection to the area, being a lifelong Brooklynite, and also that she had photographed the neighborhood in 1979 when she was working for a government-funded project, and essentially the neighborhood doesn't look any different now than it did then. And it's still very much an immigrant neighborhood, populated to a great extent by Russian-speaking immigrants from former Soviet Union, primarily Ukraine. Got the nickname of Little Odessa. And so the pictures that you see from then and now are not all that different, but it's just a fascinating window into a very interesting singular neighborhood within the mosaic of New York City, which has so many different places that each have their own identity and personality.
What stands out to you most about how Halpern captured these moments?
Well, she's a great photographer, and she's kind of like a fly on the wallpaper, and she doesn't intrude on her subjects, but she's very successful in capturing their essence, and she's also, I might note, the author of a book called Kibbutz and Nash, which is look back at a beloved and now no longer existing Dubrow's cafeteria. So she's been doing this for a long time, and she's just very good at capturing people without intruding on their space. So I guess that's her MO.
Well, the other book is also terrific. I have the book, and my dad, when we would visit Brooklyn, would take me to Dubrow's. And so it really resonated with me, and I'm sure with thousands and thousands of others who frequented that cafeteria. I noticed that this issue also features stories exploring significant periods of Jewish history, including an article on the history of Jewish orphanages, in which B'nai B'rith has a real past and history, and another about a Nazi-era farming school for Jewish teenagers. What kind of research and reporting went into telling these stories, some that are over 100 years old?
Well, both writers have personal connections to their stories, and the Jewish orphanage, the most fortunate unfortunates, are Marlene Tressman, and she herself was an orphan and the product of an agency that grew out of the Jewish orphanages in New Orleans, and has written a book from which this article is adapted. So she was very much had a personal interest in doing the research, and she does a good job of bringing these institutions to life. You mentioned B'nai B'rith was a sponsor of some of them, and it's a little piece of Jewish American history that I had absolutely no knowledge of. So it was a revelation to me, and I think also maybe to many of our readers. Heidi Landecker is the daughter of a man who was a German Jew, and during the 30s, there was a Jewish German council that established a number of farm training camps throughout Germany. This was before the final solution, when the Nazis' plan was to make the country Juden-free, Jew-free, not by genocide, but by exporting them. And one way to do that was to make young German Jews exportable to countries who needed their labor. So her father was a resident Gross Briesen, which was one of these camps in what is now Poland. It was in Germany, and he managed to get out and to immigrate to the United States. And actually, it was a farm training school, and he was a farmer in upstate New York, and that's where Heidi grew up. And so she had his memories, and he actually had organized a couple of reunions of Gross Brieseners. The first one, ironically, were a bunch of young men, youth really, who were all together in a German concentration camp. And the second one was one he organized in upstate New York towards the end of his life. So she had a lot of primary material, and also a scrapbook, a photo scrapbook that the Gross Brieseners had been given when they left the camp.
Yeah, there are some really fascinating photos that accompany this piece. Why do you think that this period of his life left such a profound impact that she felt compelled to revisit it decades later? Because I had not heard about this. And, we hear so much. Of course, I'm sure there's still much that we don't know, even with the passage of 9 decades. So what do you think was her reasoning for saying, I've got to tell this story?
Well, we all of us, or many of us at least, have this existential question. Why do I exist? Why am I here? I myself come from immigrant grandparents, and had my grandfather not immigrated from what's now Belarus in 1904. My mother was the first American born 3 years later. I wouldn't exist because my family was basically massacred in 1942. So I'm sure that motivated her. How did he survive? Which of course is the reason that she was here, to tell a story. And I think that if you're a journalist, you feel almost a mission, not to tell your own story, but to tell a story that might be yours, but has universal application. And it's important for people to know about, lest we forget.
Well, another story in the magazine explores the DNA testing company MyHeritage, which is based in Tel Aviv. What makes MyHeritage stand out from larger, more well-known companies like Ancestry or 23andMe? Is there something unique about its approach or its focus that sets it apart?
Yes, well, that's an interesting story. When I first actually became a subscriber to MyHeritage, I had no knowledge that it was an Israeli startup, but it has it's in 42 languages compared to Ancestry, which is in 6. It has 50 million family trees and 20.7 billion historical records. So, and it's really international in its reach and its scope, and that's what makes it unique, I think, among this sort of growing field of ancestry research and genealogy.
What do you think will resonate most with readers about this story, especially those curious about uncovering their own family history, as you've done and so many others have done? I think it's it's kind of a question mark that kind of sits on you. And in the days when we didn't have the ability to do this, well, there wasn't much you could do about it. You could go to the library. You could visit, in our case, as Jews, the town from which our ancestors came from, the immigrants came from, although until the fall of the Soviet Union, that wasn't so easy to do. But now you just sign up, you pay a fee, and you can really do a deep dive. So what do you think propels this?
Well, I think that, very popular TV show, Henry Louis Gates says, finding your roots. I think there's a great increasing interest in where we come from, regardless of your ethnicity or race or whatever. And it's true that information is now much more accessible. And there's the internet, and you don't even have to subscribe to Ancestry or MyHeritage to. The Mormons have their own database, which is free to use. And also DNA has made a big difference. Many records were destroyed through various terrible times in our histories. But now with the DNA, you can find matches even if you don't have the documents to back them up, and that's revolutionary. That's one of the things that MyHeritage does, among other similar groups, and they've been able to find matches and unite people in search of their roots with ancestors that they never knew existed, or there were big gaps in their family tree, and that's really it's revolutionary, absolutely.
Well, next we have an article about the Secure Community Network, known as SCN. For those who aren't aware, Secure Community Network responds to potential attacks that target the Jewish community. They regularly conduct situational awareness and active shooter trainings across the country, helping people recognize and respond effectively in the event of an attack. In the weeks following October 7th, SCN reported a staggering 774% increase in swatting incidents. And in the interest of full disclosure, B'nai B'rith, as part of the broader Jewish community, has engaged and interacted with SCN over a period of time. Gene, why do you think it was important to spotlight SCN's work in this particular issue?
Well, Dan, as you mentioned, the incidents of anti-Semitism and violent acts against Jews have increased exponentially since October 7th. But talk about an evergreen. The organization was founded 20 years ago, and shortly after I became editor, we did a story on Secure Community Network. So here it is, and it didn't seem quite as urgent then, although obviously there was anti-Semitism, and this was a good resource for people to keep up with what was going on and maybe learn how to deal with situations. But now, 20 years later, it seemed more than timely to revisit this organization based in Chicago, and that not only if you go to their website or you're on their email list, you will be probably horrified and maybe informed to read all the incidents of anti-Semitism in this country. But you'll also learn that there are ways to cope or combat these incidents. So I think they perform an important service. And if not now, when?
What kind of advice does SCN offer to people who feel unsafe? What steps can Jewish communities take to better protect themselves against these hate crimes during this very politically charged time in which we live, uncertain times in which we live?
Well, they say a bunch of stuff. They say, don't not be Jewish. Don't stop engaging in Jewish rituals and activities, but be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of your surroundings. And furthermore, if you're in a situation, worst case scenario, they have 3 words: run, hide, fight. And that was applied in the situation in Colbyville, Texas, the other year, where there was a violent attack in a synagogue, and one of the congregants was able to distract, and somebody else was able to disable the attacker. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. But just the overall advice is just be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of your surroundings, and do not change your life. Do not stop being Jewish just because of this threat.
That's interesting, because I think that people sometimes ask, what can I do? What can one person do? And that's good advice. It starts with that. Of course, there are many other things that go into protecting the community, but it certainly is timely that this piece is in this issue. This issue also includes 2 profiles on 2 very different accomplished women. One features Corrade O'Brien, who's been working to keep Yiddish theater alive by translating some of its oldest plays, many that have never been accurately translated for the stage before. So what sparked her interest in learning the Yiddish language, which is not easy, especially as an Irish Catholic. And on the surface, it kind of feels like this came out of left field, but what a great story.
Well, we think it's a great story too. Props to Cheryl Kempler, who's our archivist, who wrote the story and found it and pitched it. So Coretta O'Brien grew up in Boston, but Irish. She spoke Irish language. And when she was an undergraduate at Boston University, she had an internship at the Yiddish Book Center in Western Massachusetts, piqued her interest. And so she studied Yiddish literature. And then she spent a year studying the subject at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And then she got a job and moved to Manhattan. And she did the website for a Yiddish resource, and that's how she got into it. And so, interestingly, she's the Yiddish rock star from Galway, Ireland. And what an interesting story! And she managed to revive some Yiddish plays that were sort of buried from the early days of Yiddish theater. She got to know a lot of the stars of Yiddish theater. They were on Second Avenue, and by the time she got to them, they were in their 80s and 90s. And so she just, was fascinated by it, and she's made kind of a career out of it. And so she's even performed in some of these plays. And so that's a great story, and we're so pleased to tell it.
Yeah, no, it is. And, Second Avenue, which was called the Jewish Rialto, there were so many theaters packed by audiences of immigrants, and then later, perhaps children of immigrants who were Yiddish speaking. And then, unfortunately, that era and that great contribution to Jewish culture kind of fell off the radar. And it's great that people like O'Brien are bringing it back. So it's really a terrific story. Another profile takes us through the journey of Leah Goldstein, the first woman cyclist to win the Race Across America. Grueling competition, so intense it took her 11 days to finish. What drives Goldstein to keep pushing herself in such physically and mentally demanding races?
Well, she's always been that way. I mean, she was the boxing championship when she was a younger person. She's in her mid-50s now, and she was in the IDF for many years. She's Canadian-born, and this is something that's just, who she is and what she does. And she's driven to continue to compete physically, and she she cycles these endurance contests across the United States. She's done some with a pit crew and some without, through all kinds of climatic changes, heat, so on. And her philosophy, she's actually also written a book about it, is you shouldn't stop living when you are still alive. So that's her mantra, her advice to the rest of us. So just, pursue your passion. And she does that.
Is that what you found most inspiring about her journey as a woman breaking barriers, especially in such a brutal competition?
Yeah, well, she's a role model, not, for women, of course, but for everyone. That she's just continues to, I did a story a few years ago about a 79-year-old guy who was running in his, 50th New York City marathon. And, some people are just motivated to, to not surrender to their numerical age and to just continue to do what they love. And that's inspiring. It's inspiring to, in her case, as a woman, but to all of us. It's a good way to live.
Gene, is there anything else that you'd like to highlight from this issue? Is there a particular story or feature that you feel particularly proud of or perhaps personally connected to?
Well, I'm proud of all the stories. I think they're all great. I hope the readers enjoy them as well. But obviously, I feel personally connected indirectly to Gross Briesen because one side of my family emigrated from Germany, and most of them arrived here in the 1880s. But another branch, left on the eve of Kristallnacht, and almost all of them got out. Not all of them. And of course, on my mother's side, they were almost all exterminated. My mother used the word destroyed during the German occupation of their hometown of Belushi in what is today Belarus. And so that resonates with me. And both those stories do. And other than that, it's a great issue. I love doing it. I hope everybody loves reading it, and I can only promise more great stories to come in 2025.
Well, I also have a regular column in B'nai B'rith magazine, as does our most recent past president, Seth Ricklin. In the 2024 issue, Seth reflected on his impact as president, and we both addressed the rise in global anti-Semitism and bias against Israel amidst the war in Gaza. You can read these columns along with all the stories that we discussed today and more on our website, b'naibrith.org. Gene, thank you for taking us behind the scenes of the latest issue of B'nai B'rith magazine and for everything that you do to make each edition so exceptional. It's been a pleasure speaking with you as always.
Thank you. Same.
Well, this wraps up today's episode of Conversations with B'nai B'rith. A huge thank you to Gene Meyer for joining me and sharing insights into the latest issue of B'nai B'rith magazine, and to you, our listeners and viewers, for tuning in. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode with others, post about it on social media, or leave us a comment or a rating. And to stay updated, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for more great content. We'll be back soon with more important discussions on the issues that matter most to the Jewish community and beyond. Until then, for my guest, Gene Meyer, this is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Take care, everyone.